Welcome back to Second Breakfast. What an experience we have just had watching Alien Romulus. When I tell you I recoiled throughout this film in disgust, in horror, this was a thrill ride. If you dropped the bar down on top of me, I could have been on a roller coaster. I was locked in for the entire runtime.
You really were. Cam doesn't usually recoil and physically react when we see horror movies. Usually that's me. I'm the one who's having a moment and freaking out, and you're just sitting there quietly, just taking it in.
I feel nothing.
And afterwards you're like, oh, I was so scared. I'm like, I couldn't tell. No, this time you were the one who was losing it in the chair. It was fun. I mean, I was scared too, but you were really recoiling. It was fun to watch.
The dread, the disgust. I mean, if this is why you've clicked on the video or clicked on the episode, the movie's fantastic. Go check it out.
It was real good.
But we want to talk about it in a slightly different way from what I've seen everyone else do online. Because this is not just a horror movie or an action movie or just going to a cinema. There's more context to it. It's more and less than the way I've seen people talk about it.
Yeah.
And the big question I want to use to frame our discussion is, what do you want out of a legacy sequel? What do you want out of the seventh entry in a franchise? And this is not even that clean, because Alien has tiptoed into so many different genres. It has been so many different things. In some permutations, it is all about the horror and the dread and the slow burn. Sometimes it's all about esoteric science fiction and huge, mammoth, challenging ideas about God and humanity and robots. Sometimes it's an action thriller directed by James Cameron. It's been so many things. It has so many different audiences that new entry has to kind of appeal to while still standing on its own, while still satisfying lore experts. It is very much a Goldilocks proposition to make a new Alien movie.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a good question to ask, because I think we often, when we're talking about our opinions on a movie we've seen, we sort of take our expectations and what we wanted for granted and as assumptions, and don't actually identify that. And I think that's really important to help you understand how good the movie feels to you, or if you liked it or what you liked about it, rather than just being oh, it was good or it was bad. And it's well, why? What were you hoping? What would have made it good or bad for you? So I think that's a good question to ask.
I want to sort of lay out this point a little stronger. There is this quick laundry list of elements I'm looking for in a new Alien movie, and I'm sure everyone at home, or Maggie of course, can add in their own kind of elements that they're in the market for here. When I go to a new entry in a long-running franchise, I want some of the aesthetic from the original movie. You know, it was scrappy, it was dangerous, everyone was taking a risk, things felt raw and authentic. You can talk about the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you can talk about the first Halloween movie, you can talk about the first Alien. But because I've seen that movie, and because I've seen probably a lot of the sequels, if I'm still interested in seeing it now, I want a quicker pace. If it's a horror movie, I want more kills because I know the ropes, because I've already seen some. It has to be faster and more efficient than the first one, but not rushed. You see the Goldilocks element in all of these.
And it's Fede Álvarez, so you want it to be gross. That's also part of your expectation and hope, is that the gore is going to be nasty, you know?
I want the new entry to evoke some of my favorite moments and characters without feeling redundant, without just restaging great kills or great moments, without just rehashing characters. You want them to not fuck up the timeline, but still add something worth doing. You don't want the lazy cameos of the original actors passing the baton to the new generation, the mentors who get killed off by Kylo Ren at the end of the film. You don't just want that. You want new characters that are interesting and feel like the old ones, but they're not in competition with the original characters. You want to maybe tie up some loose ends that are dangling out there in the franchise, but don't make things too complicated. Don't drown me in the lore, but still feel necessary.
And don't retcon things, and don't retroactively change things and fix things. That's not what you want either.
And if you add together all of these qualified Goldilocks type points, it makes for a magic trick. You're asking for something incredibly difficult and nuanced and negotiated from a filmmaker. It's an incredibly tough ask for any creative to step into a long-running franchise. You want the feel of the old movies, but with some new thrills that satisfy my more experienced palate. And here's the thing. Fede Álvarez in Alien Romulus does all of this and more.
Absolutely. And I don't know how he did it, truly. I don't know how he did it. Because I went into this movie... when I first heard it was coming out, I had these high expectations. I love Fede Álvarez. I love his reboot remake of Evil Dead for all the reasons you just listed. He's, I think, accomplishing all of those things and walking that tightrope. And I was like, great, I'm thrilled, this is going to be fun. But then I think we've said this before, this has been the year of disappointments. A lot of big, highly anticipated projects have come out this year that have really just fallen flat for us.
Anticipated by us.
Yes, right. And so I was like, the closer we got to the release date, I was like, I don't know if I want to have such high expectations because I'm worried this is just going to be another disappointment. And we'd seen mixed reviews online. Not that that means anything, but still, it's, discouraging. And so I was really nervous. And boy, was I so pleasantly... I was so pleased. I was so happy and satisfied with this movie.
I'm glad you used some of those terms like reboot or legacy sequel or remake, because there's an element of all of those things here. And for that reason, I'm not really interested in comparing Romulus to, for example, Alien or Aliens, to the first movie or that initial sequel that totally genre shifted it. I think it's much more interesting, and I think it really shows the masterstroke of threading the needle that the film accomplishes. I think you can do that much more by talking about Alien Romulus in the context of other sixth sequels. So the seventh entry in a franchise, but the sixth sequel. And by the time any franchise that survives that long, those movies, when you really get up there in numbers, they start to feel like kind of clean slate sequels. There's a trend as you get further in a series that you disregard the entire canon.
Right, because they've run out of stuff, so they have to start over, basically.
Yeah, so in the marketing, they'll say like, oh, you don't need to have seen the other ones. We're really just kind of making a sequel to the first one again.
Right, or just like playing around in that world, but not really tying it much to anything else that's happened. Yeah.
And yes, you could argue it's a sci-fi film. There's obviously science fiction in all of the Alien films, but it really starts as a horror movie. The first Alien is a fantastic slow burn. The spaceship is a haunted house in space.
Right.
It's a horror film.
So do you have a list of other 6 sequel horror movies?
Look at that. Playing T-ball. I think that is where I want to compare it. Other sixth sequels in long-running horror / sci-fi franchises.
I think that's more appropriate, than just comparing it to a direct sequel, because it's not.
Right, which has less to deal with, less to reckon with, fewer scales to balance. Compare Alien Romulus instead to something like the Blumhouse Halloween movie.
Oof. Yep.
Or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022, where those disregard everything except the original movie and make a straight sequel to that, but those are very much structured around, we recasted the original final girl, and it's a rematch 40 years later between her and the original monster.
And we liked that movie. We did an episode about it. We liked it, but I think we liked it as a 7th movie. You know what I mean? Or however many it was. It was
a qualified enjoyment.
Yeah.
And I didn't love the Blumhouse Halloween movie.
No.
And I really didn't like the sequels.
No.
But compare this as well to another 6th sequel that takes a totally different direction, Saw 7: The Final Chapter. Which does the thing of, let's kind of disregard, you pay off and kind of tie a knot around some of the extremely convoluted plot, which we love, but
love it.
That movie is trying to end a lot of the Jill Hoffman, all of those long-running plots, but it's also really trying to make a sequel to the first film. It brings back Dr. Gordon.
You always have to say it like that.
He's got the cane, he's got the limp because he cut off his foot.
Yes.
And it is kind of a member berries thing. It's kind of a diminishing returns, and it's just trying to please God, put a bullet in the head of, finally end the franchise.
Because by the time you get to the 7th film, you're so far removed from the original. You've gone so many new directions, and so trying to connect it back is challenging, honestly. And I admire what they're doing, because by the time you get there, it's almost making fun of itself, and I think that's fun and clever and cute, and I like what they're doing. I think the Saw franchise is we talked about this, it's one of the best horror franchises ever, because it's so absurd. But the 7th movie does not feel like it's even in the same universe as the first Saw. And that's not what's happening here with Alien.
No, it does. This has a level of charm and hype that those films never do. When you get 6 sequels deep, there's usually an exhaustion or a desperation or something that feels very calculated. Compare this to something like The Force Awakens.
Oof.
Of course, that's the 7th Star Wars, and if we're playing with the sci-fi of this film, that is structurally pretty tightly a remake of the original. Doesn't really color outside the lines. It's fine, but it's also pretty safe.
And there's so much fan service in that. And that's one of the biggest criticisms I've seen of Romulus, is that it's like The Force Awakens for Alien because of all the fan service. And yeah, there are member berries fan service moments in Romulus, but I liked them, and I didn't think they were nearly as like heavy-handed as the ones in Force Awakens. Force Awakens leans so heavily into that it's like sickening and irritating and annoying. And I didn't find that happening here in Romulus. Now, to be fair, I've only seen the original Alien. I haven't seen any of the other sequels. And I believe there were moments in Romulus that were also like acknowledging or nodding to other sequels in the franchise. So maybe the fan service didn't bother me because it didn't feel so dense. But I liked it. And like, to be fair, I'm not against the idea of fan service. I am a fan and I like to be serviced. Like, I don't think that's a problem to do things that I like.
That's a great line.
Like, sorry, oh no, they made me happy in a movie. How dare they? Like, like the concept is not bad. It's when you overdo it that it's annoying. And I didn't find it to be overdone here. But you've seen more of the Alien movies, Cam. Did you find it too much or too heavy-handed?
I am also a fan who likes to be serviced. That's a great line.
Like, it's so funny.
This is a franchise smoothie, and I think there were a couple member berries that hit a little too hard. The bitch line from Aliens, I didn't need to hear that line for line said again.
Oh, okay.
I didn't love that.
Okay, I remember that. I was like, why is everybody clapping? I just thought it was a fine line. Okay, that makes more sense. If
people are clapping, you're probably not doing the right thing.
Yeah, okay.
Especially during a horror movie.
No, the one moment where it would have been appropriate to clap is, die, motherfucker. Like, that would have been good. I would have clapped there.
But I don't need that either. Like,
sure.
I love the Die Hard sequels, even the bad ones, but I mean, I don't know. Does he have to say
yippee-ki-yay every time? Yeah, it's annoying.
I don't know. At some point, diminishing returns.
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of riffs borrowed from the other films in the franchise that lent this a sense of cohesion.
Mm-hmm.
The freaky final form of the alien that kind of breeds, spoilers, with the human. It looks
the one that looks like a person is really upsetting. Yeah.
It looks like the guys from Prometheus.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, you have 2 chestburster scenes. You have more riffs on pregnancy, which Ridley Scott's prequels played with more.
Okay.
The only one that felt like too much for me, and this is really the only knock I have against the film, is how much of Ian Holm they had.
Oh, yeah. I strongly disliked that. I mean, I'm always going to hate the face thing where you implant a different face on somebody, either when the actor is younger or when they're no longer alive. I hate that. I just think that's so weird and disrespectful, and I don't think that's a good direction our technology is going, but like that's
mostly it just doesn't look good.
Yeah, like it also like looks bad.
In a movie that looks this fucking beautiful, it didn't look great.
I think they could have just gotten a guy who looked like Ian Holm. Like, I think that would have been fine.
Or shot the first couple times he's talking. You're seeing the side of his face. He's kind of in shadow. And there's the suggestion. When you see half of his body and all the entrails hanging out, you're like, oh shit, that's Ash from the first movie.
Yeah, right.
And that's exciting. I think they should have kept it more suggestive.
I agree.
Because when they show him through the screen with the shitty cameras, with the blue and the fuzz and all the lines on it, he looks fine.
Right.
When it's through a couple filters, those straight shots of him with the mouth moving look bad.
Because the thing is, if you're an Alien fan, even if it's that subtle, you'll know it's supposed to be him. Yeah. If you haven't seen the original Alien, if you're like 20 years old and you have no idea who this guy is, you're just looking at it and going, why does his face look so weird?
They do introduce the character enough that I think it still makes sense if you hadn't seen the original.
Right.
But yeah, I think you could have cut all those moments.
We didn't need that.
It could have been more suggestive.
I didn't mind the character being there. I thought that worked well for the plot. But that technical choice was, I think, a poor one. But that's like my only complaint about this movie.
Yes,
everything else is fantastic.
Exactly. And I think that's the mulligan. I think we give it that kind of freebie on the bingo square. But
sure.
The movie, with all of these nods to the other films in the franchise, I appreciated them, and I didn't think they were over the line. I didn't think they were kind of crutches that the film was leaning on. There was an element of some greatest hits throughout the film, but I thought they were all remixed in a way to be meaner and grosser.
Yeah.
And some of them were almost misdirections. It reminded me a lot, within this kind of looser context, of Fede Álvarez's Evil Dead.
Yes.
Where he hit some of the notes that you need to for loosely remaking, sequelizing the original Evil Dead, where you have the weird stuff with the trees. Mm-hmm. You have the girl in the basement kind of pushing up the little bit of the trapdoor.
Yeah, you have to do that. Yeah.
It worked, and it made it feel, I think, more like an Alien film. But because he seemed so savvy and so comfortable in this world, if he does get a sequel, and I really hope he does, Alien Ramus, it's right there.
Yeah.
I would love to see him have a longer leash, I think, away from the franchise, where he can innovate, where he can do all the fucked up stuff he's so good at.
Right.
I think there was more room for this film to be nasty.
Yes.
But I love this as a proof of concept of, hey, I am a safe steward to play in this sandbox, I think his next one could be a big, nasty swing.
Right, because even this one is like grosser and more gory than the original, but like the original really isn't that gross. Like the moments that are gross are disgusting, but they're like maybe 2 moments, right? And this one has more than 2, but it is still, I think, for Fede Álvarez, like if you compare it to his Evil Dead, it is more restrained in its gore, but just because that's the way Alien is. Like Evil Dead is like famously disgusting and bloody, and there's all kinds of fluids on screen.
Practical.
Right. And then Alien is not quite as bloody. There's a lot more suspense and atmosphere, but when it is bloody, it's disgusting. Yeah, the practical effects, man. I mean, every shot in this movie was beautiful, but I think what really carried it into that realm of like absolute stunning gorgeousness were the practical effects. Like Alien, the original Alien, obviously is fully practical effects because it's 1979 and that's all you have, but they're really like famously fantastic practical effects, and you can tell that Fede Álvarez is a practical effects guy and is reveling in that and is like appreciating that when there's a real thing on the screen, that's almost always going to be more effective than CG.
It's exactly the right kind of gross. There are many ways in which this film feels like a period piece. It feels like the original Alien in all the right ways without being too redundant or derivative. The way that the creatures are also troubling and gross, and they're all dripping oil.
There's so many fluids.
Everyone's greasy and
so
sticky.
Gross.
It's perfect. This is absolutely the most beautiful film of the year.
Right.
I think maybe even surpassing Dune 2. The fog, the tech, the clunky.
The fog.
I mean, the first 45 seconds, I was locked in from the first scene.
Yes, because it's like completely silent when you jump in. And so it's like really leaning into the original Alien in space. No one can hear you scream. Like it is setting that atmosphere so well. And you can tell that every shot and every set is really well thought out.
The buttons, the lights, the tactile retro feel of the tech. And even
the colors, like it all looks so good.
Even from the exterior shots, I got the sense that Fede Álvarez understands space and loves it for the same reason I do. Because Alien is by far my favorite sci-fi anything ever made. Space has to feel titanic, cool, colorful, and dangerous at all times. And that always worked here. I was just stunned by the images of the film. There are 2 other elements that evoked for me the first Alien in the almost subliminal ways that really matter.
Okay.
The first one is the script.
Oh, yeah.
So this movie's an hour and 59 minutes, which for a horror movie is a little long.
It is a little long.
For a sci-fi, very short.
Like not a slasher, but like, that one by one everybody's killed. Yeah.
But
spoiler, but
if you told me it was 90 minutes, I would believe you. Because the movie,
it felt quick.
It feels like a sprint. And it always feels like it has something to prove.
And it like gets going early.
Yes, exactly.
Like we saw the original Alien in theaters a while back. They were showing it. We never got to see it in theaters because we weren't alive then. And it was great and I loved seeing it. But I remember thinking, man, these like first 45 minutes are really, really slow. And that's not a bad thing. But it was a little tough for me to really get on board. I get they're building tension, but I maybe my 2024 attention span couldn't handle it. And this one gets going early. And not that that's like specific to our time period. Yikes. Because like Evil Dead, for example, that's early 80s. That gets going immediately. And it maintains that heightened in tempo the whole way through.
For 80 minutes.
Right. So it's just a different kind of thing. And I liked that this one was a bit of a departure from the pacing of the original Alien. Because it felt more in tune with Fede Álvarez, I think. More in tune with his style and the type of movies he likes to make.
It also works because we've already all seen the slow burn version of Alien horror.
I don't want to see it again. Film. Exactly.
You don't need to.
Right. So, because it's already been done really well.
There's no fat in the script. And it doesn't fall into any of the familiar traps of other legacy sequels, especially in horror movies. It doesn't feel dated immediately. It has that feel of the original Alien film, which is so evergreen and timeless.
Sure.
There are no quips. There is no irony.
Ugh.
The young characters are not sort of tragically modern.
Right.
In the original film, it's all of these British character actors who are playing engineers and different forms of scientists who have been hired by this company. So they're all a little older. And this is all kids trying to escape basically mining contracts who are younger, less experienced. So they're not fully established character actors. A lot of these are faces we're seeing for the first time.
Right.
But the characters have that lived in, naturalistic feel that the character actors from the first movie had. It feels understated. It feels organic. The actors feel comfortable. They're working class. There's a laid-back, personable quality to this ensemble.
Yeah. And like the original, like they are styled like in their like hair and outfits in very like contemporary ways. Like I found like the things that the characters were wearing in this one felt like, oh yeah, that's what Gen Z wears now, and that's how they do their hair and stuff. But it was the same in the original Alien. Like everybody in that movie looks straight out of 1979. So like I think you're carrying that lineage and it works really well. But you're right, there is still a timeless quality despite the styling of the
But wardrobe. I think it's that Gen Z happens to dress, fashion is all cyclical, going in and out. There's just an overlap between the current style and 1979.
That's true.
The all-white shoes. I mean, there's a total continuity in the fashion there.
Yes, definitely.
The other thing that really just caught my imagination was the music, which is not something I always notice, especially individual instruments. I think because of you and Game of Thrones and cellos, I'm pretty tuned into strings and dramatic strings.
Right.
But I was so caught by the woodwinds. I don't know which one, but I heard something whistling. There was a sense to the score in this film being curious and orchestral and adventurous in a way that felt sweeping and romantic and old Hollywood, in a way I associate with that, or the era of the original Alien film.
I see, yeah.
And that really brought this together for me. It gave me that sense of wonder and possibility that the first Alien did.
Yeah, I didn't notice the score as much as you did. Oddly enough, I was much more focused on the visuals, but I did, and I guess the moments where it was silent, like I noticed the sound design a lot more, but I noticed the score especially in those really tense moments where it's going like do 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 do, like it feels almost robotic and mechanical and computerized and tense in that way. But yeah, I'm glad that the score worked really well for you. It was fun.
I'm so relieved that this film was so good. I had such a good time with it.
Me too.
And I left the film with the same sort of sense of peace that I did when I walked out of the Fede Álvarez Evil Dead, right? Where the original is still unmatched. It's perfect. It is on the Mount Rushmore of horror movies. But this was fantastic. And I got the sense that Fede Álvarez loves the original Evil Dead, loves the original Alien just as much as I do.
Yes.
But also that he is a worthy successor in that sandbox. I think he threaded the needle and kind of did the impossible here. And God willing, he gets another one. I hope he goes as gnarly as humanly possible.
I hope so too. I hope he just does it even more. I mean, it's set up perfectly when you got Remus and Romulus together. So I really hope that he keeps going with this, and I hope that he gets to stay involved, unlike the second Evil Dead and the reboot franchise, because that was not led by Fede Álvarez, and it really suffered for that.
Evil Dead Rise.
Yeah,
that was a very different take.
Yeah, it was frustrating. So I hope that this continues.
Yeah, this was just fantastic.
It was.
We've done a lot of horror movie episodes lately. If you want even more of this type of discussion, we did 2 episodes on Longlegs. One was about it remixing the classics, and then one was me going deep on some Dr. Faustus theories.
Y'all really liked that episode. We appreciate that.
Yeah, I also just did one about Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the kind of vampire subtext you could read into that film.
Yeah.
That was a really fun deep dive. And over on our Patreon, where you can get dozens of bonus episodes and a lot of horror content. This past Sunday, we just released the latest entry in our Breakfast Buffet series, which is a roundup discussion pulling in a bunch of works of art. This one is pulling in 3 movies from the last couple months that we felt kind of conflicted about and wanted to talk through. It's more of a discussion than just any sort of simple recommendation.
It's like we're really wrestling with these 3 movies.
We're grappling with these works of art and all of their different permutations and elements. Really fun chat about Cuckoo, In a Violent Nature, and Maxine.
Yeah.
So you can go over there and check that out, support the show, get a bunch of other bonus episodes. Thank you very much for listening, whether it's on Spotify or Patreon or YouTube. Thank you for making this show possible, and we will be back in just a few days with another brand new episode.